Every time you buy a morning coffee, pay for a haircut, or upgrade your phone, you get a receipt. It's a simple, everyday record proving a transaction took place and money changed hands. Now imagine taking every purchase made by every person, business, and government agency in the country over a single year and printing them onto one miles-long grocery receipt. That master receipt actually exists. Economists call it gross domestic product, or GDP. Think of GDP as the grand total at the bottom of that nationwide receipt. It's the final price tag for every new car built, every meal served in a restaurant, and every hour of legal advice provided within the country's borders over a year. It is the single most important scorecard we have to measure the economy. By checking the total on this receipt, we can definitively tell whether a nation's economic engine is speeding up, stalling out, or shrinking. To read this scorecard accurately, you have to understand its strict golden rule. GDP only measures market transactions where money officially changes hands. When you pay a plumber $200 to fix a broken pipe, that goes on the receipt. When the government spends $100 million to pay the new highway, that goes on the receipt too. But this creates a massive blind spot. Incredibly valuable human activities, like raising children, cooking a meal for your family, or volunteering at a local charity, are completely ignored by GDP, simply because nobody wrote a check for them. Because GDP is strictly a measurement of money in motion, our official statistics consistently undercount the true scope of human effort and societal value. This brings up a logical problem. If a country's receipt total is 5% higher this year than it was last year, are its citizens actually 5% richer? Think of the economy like a shopping cart. If prices went up over the year, the total bill at the register will be higher, even if the physical amount of stuff in your cart stayed exactly the same. The country didn't grow, it just experienced inflation. Economists call that raw, unadjusted total on the receipt nominal GDP, and it can be highly misleading, because rising prices can make it look like the economy is booming when it isn't. To find the truth, we use a metric called real GDP. This is a vital adjustment that strips away the inflation. It forces us to look past the changing prices and see if the country actually produced more physical goods and services than before. Because of this inflation trap, policymakers rely exclusively on real GDP to measure true economic health. Without making that adjustment, a country could boast a record-breaking economy on paper, while its citizens are actually able to afford fewer goods. But even real GDP has limits, especially when you compare different countries. For example, India's total economic output is roughly 40 times larger than the tiny European nation of Luxembourg. Looking only at those totals ignores a massive missing variable: population size. To get a clearer picture of living standards, we use GDP per capita. This means taking the giant national receipt and dividing it equally by every single person in the country to find the average individual share. When you divide Luxembourg's much smaller total among its tiny population, you find that the average standard of living there is actually drastically higher than in India. Total GDP is excellent for measuring a nation's geopolitical weight on the world stage, but if you want to understand an average citizen's daily reality, GDP per capita is the far superior metric. When you hear about an annual GDP growth rate of 2% or 8%, it can sound like abstract math, but compounding that growth over decades reshapes the physical world. Take China in 1980. At the time, its nominal GDP was a small fraction of Western nations, built largely on rural agriculture and basic manufacturing. That steady climb replaced dirt roads with high-speed rail and turned small villages into the dense vertical cities we see today, as hundreds of millions of people moved into a new middle class. While GDP is just a number on a spreadsheet, that growth provides the tax revenue and private investment that nations use to build modern hospitals, expand transit networks, and fund the programs that help pull families out of poverty. It is crucial to remember that this engine does not measure happiness. It ignores environmental sustainability, and it tells us nothing about how equally wealth is distributed. It is strictly a measure of quantity, but as a quantity, it remains the ultimate price tag of a nation's labor, innovation, and production. The next time you hear a report on GDP growth, look past the percentages. You're looking at the actual total on the country's giant receipt, and you now know exactly which items made it onto the paper.